This right here is the new S1 system from Nomadic Innovations. Today we're going to break this thing down, we're going to walk through how to install it, and I'm going to give you guys my first impressions using this unit for the past week. Many thanks to Nomadic Innovations for partnering with me on this project. This install begins with drilling a 2 1/4 inch hole to use as a pass-through for the power and hoses. Then we go ahead and treat the holes using Rust-Oleum spray paint to prevent rust. The S1 comes with this grommet that clips together and is designed to be used with these 2 foam pieces. After messing around with it for a few minutes, I opted to use one of my leftover pass-throughs I had instead of this one. I went ahead and drilled 4 bolt holes, and after ensuring a proper fit, I measured, marked, and drilled holes in the door for the bolts to pass through. I also went ahead and treated these holes with Rust-Oleum. I then put some silicone on the back, carefully fed the bolts through, hand tightened the nuts, and then snugged everything up. To finish things off, I lined the outside with the silicone to ensure a watertight connection. The next step I took is I placed the interior unit onto the mounting board that the S1 comes with, and I marked where the holes lined up so I could see how they lined up with the inside of the van. I then drilled 4 holes for the bolts, and then used riv nuts in the factory hole locations, and then test fit the board to see how it looked. Now let's talk about how I installed the inside unit and why I chose to do it the way I did. Now there's tons of different ways you can install this inside unit. So if you're looking for a mini split system for your van, it might be slightly different. I decided to put it on the same back door that the outside unit was on, and I decided to use the wood mounting slab that they give you, and the only reason is there isn't really any structural steel here that I could just bolt right into, but there are factory riv nut holes that I was able to put some riv nuts or plus nuts into to bolt the wood to, and then allowed me to screw this to the wood, and I felt like that gave me a really secure setup. I went ahead and spray painted it black just to make it blend in a little bit better. So again, that might change. You might want to mount it more central in your van. Depends on what you want to do. You don't have to use the wood. I thought it was best for my installation purposes. Before installing the inside unit, I took a second to re-insulate my door using Havelock wool. I then bolted the wood piece to the wall, and then screwed the unit to the wood using 6 screws, making sure that the unit was straight and level as my eye could see. I then passed the hoses, power cables, and communication harnesses through the opening and secured them using the foam liner they provided in the install kit. Now you can mount the exterior unit in many different ways. I chose to mount it to a molly panel system, and the particular molly panel system I used is one from Owl Vans. I'm a big fan of Owl Vans products. I have a few on the vehicle. I'm not being sponsored to talk about Owl at all. Just that's the brand I decided to use. You guys can use any of the other carriers out there, and in fact, one of the things that I ran into is that the cut-in that the Owl system comes with limits the ability to mount the S1 up high. And the reason I wanted to mount the S1 up high is I wanted to give room for a accessory box of some sort on the back to throw tools and stuff like that in the future. Now, the solution I came up with was to use a steel bracket that I measured and drilled holes and spray painted black so it blended in a little bit better. And this gave another mounting point for the upper left arm of the S1 to bolt to. And that is how I was able to mount the S1 up high, which is going to give me enough room to mount the Owl medium box in the future. One of the other modifications I had to make to allow for the outside unit to mount was I had to cut the bracket a little bit because of how the Owl system is installed. There's one bolt that goes through the center and it was hitting perfectly. Now, not a big deal. You only need a minimum of 4 bolts on the S1, and I was able to get 6 with this installation process. So now let's talk about the hoses that I have coming through. There's a few different ways I could have probably installed these. The fact that my van is already built out, I'm a little limited on what I could do, but one of the things I thought about was drilling a hole out here and then fishing everything through the wall. and then having it just pop out and then connect in. But even then I was gonna have to come out way down and then loop it back up, so I was gonna already have this loop. So what I decided to do was drill out a hole inside the door that allowed it just to come up here and gonna be fine for where this is at in the van. I then was able to run the drain down that same hole, and I was able to run the power connector up here down that same hole, and I can still access the blade fuse here if something happens in the future. So being able to service the unit is perfect. Now let's go ahead and jump back to the voiceover, and I'll show you guys how to actually install these hoses. Next, we need to unscrew these caps to install the hoses. You will hear a slight hiss and some oil might come out, but this is normal. Press the hoses into place and hand tighten the nuts. From there, use a wrench to tighten to the recommended torque specs. I then wrap the hoses in this insulation tape and use the remaining foam to do a bit of organizing and add extra protection. We need to remove this cover on the inside unit so we can install the expansion valve. The expansion valve has these two rubber washers that need to go onto these two ends. From there, press it into place and tighten down using the two bolts provided. Then take each hose and press them firmly into place. And then use this bracket to secure the hoses in place. I opted to add the drain extension so I could run it to this factory hole at the bottom of the door. Using a bit of duct tape is fine for ensuring the connection stays, as this is just for condensate and won't be under any pressure. I then connected the communication harness by clipping the two ends together. And the last thing to do here was to pass the power through the door trim, insulate the bottom of the door area, and reinstall my door trim piece. Now, before we jump into one of the last connections to make on the outside, which is the electrical connection, I need to talk to you guys about something that I ran into. The wire loom that comes with the S1 was way too short for my needs. The S1 is on my passenger side, my batteries are on the driver's side. The loom that came was about 3 or 4 feet short. Now, talking with Jonathan over at Nomadic Innovations, they ran into a similar issue when they installed this on their Greed Machine Expedition vehicle, and he said just to up the wire size and use an Anderson connector to connect to the main unit outside. There's already an Anderson connector on that unit, but I did have to run a new one because the two Anderson connectors didn't fit, so they were sized accordingly to what the unit requires and what the gauge wire requires. Not going to jump too much into electrical on this. The main thing I want to say though is if this is something that you are uncomfortable with, either have somebody who is certified to install it do it for you, or maybe make sure you're planning to have your batteries on the same side that the unit is going to be on, because the wire loom would reach no problem. I had my wife help hold the wires in place while I crimped the pins for the Anderson connectors on each end. After crimping all 4 wires, I added a bit of glue-lined heat shrink, pressed the ends into the Anderson connectors, and then clipped the 2 connectors together. I then hid the wire in the foam loom I installed earlier. The last piece of this install is to have the unit charged. I opted to have an AC tech do this portion as it requires a professional vacuum and AC system to properly charge, and it was cheaper and more time efficient having a pro do it instead of myself. Now, in terms of my electrical connections to my actual battery bank, like I mentioned earlier, I had to run a new wire run. The original wire loom had its own inline 100 amp fuse, so I just recreated that in my own way. I put a 100 amp fuse block inside my electrical cabinet that the positive ran into, and then I ran the positive and the negative into my positive and negative side of my Lynx distributor. This is going to be very specific to your build and your van, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. Now, since I'm retrofitting an already completed vehicle, my hands were tied a little bit, so if you're in a new build or if you're going to be doing the same thing again, it might be different for you. So what I did might work, but what you might need might be a little bit different. So just check your wire gauge size and make sure that it is going to be able to carry this amperage, because if you have too much voltage drop, you're going to create obviously a fire hazard, and also the unit will then shut off because it has a low voltage detector. So if the main voltage isn't getting back to it, it actually is going to shut off, and you don't want that to happen. So now, why would I choose a mini split system rather than a roof mounted system? And the main reason is a mini split is more efficient in high heat environments. Now, I live in Las Vegas. It's a high heat environment. We get a lot of sun. So having something mounted on the roof, just getting beat on by the sun all day long, it's not going to be very good in terms of trying to produce cold air. Having a split system, you're separating your components. This blower that is going to be cycling your air is going to be in your conditioned environment rather than doing everything on the roof and trying to push cold air in. So if you're in a hot environment, a mini split unit is probably going to be a better bet than a roof mounted unit. Now let's talk about some of my first impressions, because like I said, a mini split I felt like was going to be more efficient. Now, is that true? Heck yes, I have found that it has been true. During the day right now, if I run this thing on max cool, it is getting to about 85 degrees inside the van. Now that may not sound super cool, but trust me, when you step in from 110 and you come inside and it's 85, it feels amazing. Even at 90 degrees, the temperature might be 90, but inside the van, it is so comfortable compared to outside, which I want to talk to you guys about tempering your expectations for 12 volt systems here in a second. Let's talk about the eco mode. In eco mode, it's going to cruise at about 30 amps. And then when it reaches its desired temperature, it's going to actually shut off, and then it'll turn back on when it tests that the ambient temperature has been raised. Now, I ran this on eco last night on my batteries. It kept it 75 degrees in here, and I only used 25% of my battery bank. 75 degrees when it still only gets as cool as 94, I think is what it was last night. 94 degrees outside, and I had 75 in here, and I only used 25% of my battery bank. That is freaking awesome, especially for sleeping. Now, I'm gonna put a partition, eventually like a curtain in my bed area, so that this is actually going to now cool half of my space at that point, or even just a quarter of my space. So it's going to be even more efficient. But for my entire van, being at 75, give or take, is probably warmer towards the front because of where I had my thermostat. But that is a game changer. If you guys have more questions and more testing, please let me know, because I'm planning on doing quite a bit of follow-up content about this. I'm just giving you guys roughly my first impressions of it, so I'd be curious to hear what you guys are wanting to see in terms of testing this out. Now, the split system like this is going to be efficient, like I mentioned earlier, which is why I decided to go with it. Still though, when you use an efficient system that's powerful like this, you need to understand how to make it work best. Right now, like middle of the day, I actually just shut the unit off and it's already getting uncomfortably warm in here. This unit is going to be battling not just the temperature inside, it's going to be battling this right here, the metal. Metal to metal. Like this is metal touching the metal on the outside. When the sun hits that, it's creating radiant heat on that metal. It's going to heat up all of the metal, and that's going to radiate heat inside of the van. Unfortunately, there is no really solution to that unless you maybe run closed cell foam and everything, but still that metal's getting hot. It's going to radiate the heat coming through. So this unit is also going to be battling that radiant heat as well as the ambient temperature on the inside of the vehicle. But thankfully, it's not going to be trying to cool the outside air. It's just going to be trying to cool the air that's inside the van. So one way that I find that this to help run this during the heat of the day is if I don't have it on and let's say I want to turn it on, is I actually open my windows, I turn my 2 max air fans on, I circulate a lot of the air, get air moving in here, remove some of that heat loading that happens when it's just sitting, all that radiant heat's just baking in here, and then I run this unit, and it helps a lot. It's just like when you get in your car at first, it's actually better to just blast that air conditioning unit, let all the hot air get out, let it kind of balance with the environment, and then run your air conditioner, and then run the recirculation mode so that you're getting the maximum amount. Now, another thing I also do in the heat of the day is I will sometimes turn my van on and just run the main air conditioning back here. That can usually cool this space down decently. It takes quite a bit of time to do it, but with both running, it cuts it in half the time. This is able to maintain a comfortable temperature from there on out. Now there's some other things you can do, like making sure you park in shade, make sure you're not parking on pavement or things like that, because that all just radiates heat, and it's just going to be something that the unit is going to have to fight against. And frankly, I don't care how big of a unit you have, it's really not going to compete with that. But for me, needing to knock down a lot of this just ambient heat and taking off the edge, this is checking the box. And then at night, it is keeping it so comfortable in here. I'm very, very happy. Now that is all I have for you guys today. I want to say thank you to Nomadic Innovations for being willing to partner with me on this project. Nomadic Innovations is actually known as Nomadic Cooling. They just rebranded because they have more products coming out. This is one of their newer products they've come out with. Now they are one of the leaders in the industry in terms of van air conditioning units. So if you guys are interested in checking out their roof mounted systems or even their split system like this, then head over to nomadicinnovations.com and check it out. If you guys are new to the channel, my name is Riley Clark. I am a full-time photographer. I like to take you guys on my adventures in the great outdoors, and I like to review products like this that I believe might help elevate your adventures. If this all sounds like something you are interested in, then please consider hitting that subscribe button down below. If you found value in this video, hit that thumbs up button for me. More content coming out about this here in the future, so make sure you guys keep an eye out for that. I will see you though in the next adventure.